right at the back. Yes, a very warm welcome. I hope it is warm. It's warmer than it has been at times, to St Giles. I'm very pleased to have invited him. He accepted this invitation. Bob is a Methodist minister who is chaplain at Sobel House, and well, I'm not going to say anymore actually, except he has written a wonderful book. I really, really recommend it. Reflective caring, imaginative listening to pastoral experience. So if you see it around, buy it, read it. Okay, over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Georgie. So, this afternoon, I hope we can take an unhurried stroll through life and death. I don't want to gallop. I want to leave some pauses for you to see what is connecting for you, inside of you, in your own soul. And there are times when things can surprise us. And when we're talking about death, things can come back from the past. So do look after yourself. If you need to remove yourself for a while, that would be absolutely fine. Or indeed just go somewhere else in your imagination. And there are some of you here today who know Sobel House intimately, and there are some of you who may not know anything about it. So we are here as a diverse group of people looking together at the mystery of life and death. When I was a child, I had asthma. And in those days, there weren't the steroid treatments available now. And I spent times struggling for breath. And I also found that I had quite a fear of dying. I read this delightful book, Hans Brinker. It's a tale from Holland, and it has many different forms. The thing that terrified me when I read this book was that the father in the story developed, as I remember it, a brain tumour. And I was convinced that I was going to die. Absolutely convinced as a child. And a bit later on, my grandmother was very close to death. And I went out because I couldn't stay in the house. And I looked at a tree. And I saw this tree. I saw the life flowing through it. Looking back, I would describe that as a mystical experience. It was as though I saw the essence of treeness. I saw the life and the light flowing through this tree. And it was tremendously helpful. And I think we can oscillate between those two things. When we are confronted with the mysteries of life and death, it's hard to hold them together. It's hard to find a way of integrating death with all of its unknowns And that hope that is in us of life, that nothing can destroy, nothing can touch. So it's interesting that I find myself as a chaplain at Sobel House, because it's a place where you have to face your own mortality. And Sobel House, the origins were in 1976, and the new bit that you see there, I don't know, 2003, something like that. Somebody will correct me. But a place where people come. These days, the criteria are that you're normally within the last year of your life. Still mostly people with cancer, but not all. People coming onto the ward for symptom control, for end-of-life care because it's complex physically and family-wise and psychology-wise and spiritually-wise. And in the chapel, there is this amazing window. And I've spent quite a bit of time looking at this window. Just see what you make of it for a moment. I doubt if the artist intended it, but right here in the centre, I can make out a figure, a human person. And I make out also a hand, a supporting hand underneath that person. And in my imagination, I make this a swirling wave going over their head. And I think that's what the experience of hospice can be like. People can come in to our ward feeling very afraid. The psalmist talks about the waters coming up to your neck. And then discovering that usually, hopefully, the hospice is a place that can hold you. And people do feel that. People feel that sense of sanctuary, being in a safe place. And it's a tough place for people to look at their death, or not, as they choose to. It's also a place where there is some laughter, and this shows some people in our day services, people living at home, who come in, have a nice lunch, and are together with people in the same boat, which is tremendously helpful, I think. And I think what happens when you're in an extreme situation, when you're facing ultimate, essential stuff, is that the everyday business of life gets stripped away. And we are ourselves. We are the person that we're meant to be, warts and all. And sometimes I get a glimpse of that. Seeing the real beauty of our world is tucked away out of sight in tiny pockets of light and enfolding glory. An eye skates over the dazzling green of a mallard's neck and is duly amazed. But have I seen the darkness, the proud, waddling river essence of him? So this is your gift, to let me walk around you, your too thin frame, and find a way through blazing brown eyes in a sunken face to the true beauty of you. I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago, and she was just saying what many other people say, that in these days she's been having real conversations with her family, conversations that have mattered to her. Here is a mother and her daughter, a mother who has dementia and cancer, and a daughter who is struggling with the coming loss. This rather frightening-looking character is Stu, who is one of our community nurses, and our community specialist nurses go out and support people at home. Sort of liaison for the GPs and the district nurses and the carers and everybody, point of reference. And during Hospice Care Week, we were asked, what's the important thing for you about Sobel House? And Stu has written, as you can see, the drinks trolley. And the drinks trolley contains little bottles of wine and spirits and beer, and is clinked around the corridors before lunch and before the evening meal. And I think our drinks trolley says to people, you matter. We want to look after you. We want to say to you, you are special. Have a drink. Good Methodist in me coming out there. I don't know whether you can see that clearly. Person in bed, sort of intensive care situation, and the guy in the bed is trying to pull out his leads that are keeping him alive. And the doctor is saying, you're making tremendous progress. The hospice movement, I think, has cut through this denial of we're going to make you better, because sometimes we can't be made better. And sometimes accepting death is a really good idea. Especially in the early days, I think hospice was a protest movement. And it still is. It's saying that we can't cure everything, but we can treat you as a human being. We can care for you in a really good way, so that you feel safe in your dying. And I don't know about you, but my fear of dying is that I will be totally isolated and abandoned. I will be just going on this journey by myself. And of course there's a reality about that. As we are born alone, we have to go through that birth canal by ourselves. So we die alone, going through that door by ourselves. But hospice says, actually, we can be there with you as you're preparing for that journey. And here is Dame Cicely Saunders smiling out at us. And I hope that those values expressed by Cicely Saunders are alive and kicking in hospices in this country and now around the world. We really can live our death. Except society has still quite a bit of catching up to do. We still want to push death away. I think there is a change happening. In Oxford, there is now the annual Kicking the Bucket Festival, where there are events put on, and you may have been to some of these, which are about talking about death. There are death cafes springing up in our cities and towns, where people can go and talk about dying, talk about loss. But there is within me, possibly within you, something that wants still to push death away. So back to fear. We live in Kennington by the water meadows, and a little while back there were 2 cabin cruisers that had been abandoned. I hated the sight of these cabin cruisers that had been filled up with water. Sunken boats. I am afraid of these sunken boats at the river's edge. What a terrible weight of water presses them down and down and down. A living space so thoroughly filled with cold death. There they lie, pinned, unmoving, unboated, while all around them lives and breathes and goes. This unprotesting, sullen defeat is our winter, our final capitulation to watery death, a kingfisher floating face down. What is it about death that we are so afraid of? We fear pain. We fear dying horribly. I fear that abandonment. There's something about being out of control. And we like a measure of control. We need a measure of control. It's like death strips that away from us. And therefore, it's important to learn something, to see whether we can allow something to happen deep inside of us. I, and many of you, will have seen people struggle as they get close to death. Struggling physically and mentally and spiritually. And then, fairly near the end, there is a relaxation often, helped by medication sometimes. But it's not just that. What we witness, more than anything else, is this. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross notes that death does not have to be frightening or painful. It can be really gentle. I came across this poem fairly recently. We're doing a bereavement group shared between the Maggie Centre and Sobel House, and this was a poem that one of the facilitators brought. Allow. There is no controlling life. Try corralling a lightning bolt containing a tornado. Dam a stream and it will create a new channel. Resist and the tide will sweep you off your feet. Allow and grace will carry you to higher ground. The only safety lies in letting it all in. The wild and the weak, fear, fantasies, failures and success. When loss rips off the doors of the heart, or sadness veils your vision with despair, practice becomes simply bearing the truth. In the choice to let go of your known way of being, the whole world is revealed to your new eyes. I gave this to one of our patients on the ward yesterday. No, a couple of days ago, a few days ago. And she said, I've been reading it twice a day. At the heart of the Gospels for me is Christ saying, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains itself, or it remains a solitary grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. For all the time that I've been at Sobel House, that verse has been there in my consciousness somewhere. It talks about allowing something to happen. And I guess that the more we can allow the little deaths, the failures, the weakness, the loss of control, as we go through life now, the more we can accept that stuff that we really do not want to accept at all, the easier it might be when we get to the big one. The big one with a capital D. This is Pete. Pete was somebody who loved to show people this poster that he'd been doing with me. Pete was a day services patient, and he died about a year ago, I suppose. And I feel I can show you this because he gave me permission to show it to loads of people. One day I was talking to Pete in my room, and I thought, okay, we need to try and get a bit of distance between what you're saying and the rather heavy stuff that you're talking to me about. So I divided a piece of paper. This is a poster on the door in my room at the hospice, and divided it into 4 and wrote down what I had heard Pete talking to me about that day. And he'd been talking about when I wanted to kill myself on the left, his suicidal thoughts, especially when he thought people weren't listening to him. That's when the thoughts came. And it wasn't just me that knew about his suicidal ideation, by the way. That was being held by lots of people. And he crossed it out at one point, as you can see, but it kept coming back at times when he didn't feel people were treating him seriously. On the right, you've got perhaps an idealised picture of Sobel House, but that's how Pete saw it. He hadn't had an easy upbringing. And for him, Sobel was a safe, happy, it was safe, happy, and home. And there's me up the top doing what chaplains are supposed to do, which is to pray. Pete wasn't a religious man, but he knew what chaplains were for. And in the centre you see this yellow stuff. Pete talked to me on more than one occasion of a time in an ambulance. Pete, by the way, he didn't have cancer, but he had horrible breathing problems and heart problems and diabetes as well, loads of things together. He was in an ambulance. He thought he was dying, and he was vaguely aware of people working on him in the ambulance to get his heart going. And he described to me and to others at that time, it was like being enfolded in a canopy of golden light. And he felt completely peaceful, completely serene, and he was okay. And then he gets to hospital and comes to and has to get on with another chunk of life. But having had that experience in the ambulance, Pete was not afraid of dying. And this little figure right in the centre is Pete. And these words probably will be too small to read, but that experience in the ambulance was about spirit and warmth, and it was pleasant. And here he is, and he added to this poster over a period of months, over a year, perhaps 2 years. And here he is on his journey towards death. And in that golden cloud are people who've already died, and there's part of him that really wants to just be with them. And so here he is, under warmth. And then some months later he does a smaller figure, on my way. And then a smaller figure yet, one more step. This is a slow old business, his dying. And then a tiny figure almost there. And right in the middle, there is a statement that he makes, which is free at last. For Pete, living, breathing with oxygen was problematical. It was tough going. And for him, death was freedom. Avril Stediford gave me permission to use this poem of hers, which I think is one of her best poems. Avril started off as a psychiatrist at Sobel House when it was first set up. And her husband died at Sobel House. And this is Avril writing about that need to let go of her husband. Sparrow, fear not, you are worth more than any number of sparrows. You are my sparrow, yes, there are lots more, but you are mine, I have been watching you. No, you are afraid. Come and let me hold you. Smooth your wings. Feel your racing heart. I have made a hollow of my palm. Settle in and rest. My other hand will cover you. Fingers parted so you can look out. Until you feel so safe, you fall asleep. Then I will keep you. Wait until I feel you stir and stretch. Open out my hands. Watch you fly. I think what a hospice can teach us is that we can look at death, and it's okay. We don't have to be constantly running from it. We can allow something in our souls. We can let go, and it will be all right. We can let go, and life will take over. Are life and death two distinct things? We want to keep them really separate, I think. But what if they are two faces of the same coin? What if death is always wanting to transform itself into life? I find that thought, that life and death are not two things, incredibly helpful. Here we have Peter and John, the beloved disciple. In John's Gospel, they are running to the tomb on Easter Sunday morning. And in the text in John's Gospel, John goes in eventually, and it says, he saw and believed. What did he see? What did he see? We're on the edge of mystery, or right in the centre of mystery, when we try to think about these things. When we try to think about life and death not being two things but one thing. Perhaps John glimpsed that life that death is being turned into. In Latin there is a lovely word, limen. We get our word liminal from it. Limen means threshold. And liminal space is space which is different from any other space. It's where you are poised on the edge looking into the new, looking through a door. The old stuff we know so well. We get up in the morning and brush our teeth, go to the loo, have a cup of tea, get on with our everyday lives. We know it so well. This is a different sort of space. And many people in a hospice are in this space. It's a creative space. It's a painful space to be, because you're neither here nor properly there. You're poised on the threshold. And perhaps the job of a hospice is to help people to kind of stay in that space, with one eye looking back at your life, reviewing your life, saying thank you, saying sorry, saying I love you. And with the other eye kind of glimpsing ahead, trying to glimpse through the door. You can't do it properly because you're not there yet. You are just on the edge. So those are all the slides that I've brought along today. And perhaps we just stay in silence for a few minutes and just see where your thoughts go. And then if there are any reflections you have, then let's share them together. So Georgie has a microphone. If any of you would like to say anything at all. Thank you.
Can I speak without the microphone?
I think you can actually. Unusually.
In your experience, have you a sense of how come, and I don't mean necessarily that people are dying in this question, they may be going on, but how some seem more naturally at home in the liminal than others?
At home in?
The liminal.
The liminal than others. I mean, I'm not sure I've got an easy answer for that. Yes, I mean, perhaps some people's spiritual practice has helped them, but you do find other people who are just comfortable there. I remember somebody who was dying and his skin was falling apart, basically, horrible. And he needed sedation at the end of life. And he said, I said to him, how is it for you? And he said, I've always lived my life like a canal boat, going at 3 miles an hour. And it's the same now. And he had that sense of just chugging along into death. And he was somebody who didn't have a great sense of the spiritual, the religious, I think, but nonetheless seemed to be comfortable in that space.
I would just like to add to that. Well, first of all, it is the most enormous privilege to be with somebody when they're dying. And in my experience, somebody who is not fighting, somebody who's going very gracefully through the veil, and that's what I saw. With the sun on that, I could see a veil. It's beautiful. I even envy people who are in that state of mind, because you feel that they are so much closer to God than you are. And in contrast, those who have fought it to the end, it brings the most enormous distress for oneself.